At my granddaughter's engagement dinner, I noticed my place card read, "Family sponsor. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me the city you're watching from." I've learned that stories like mine travel farther than we ever expect. I had always believed that family celebrations were meant to honor love, not measure it, not monetize it, not mock it in gold-embossed calligraphy on heavy cream cardstock. The dinner was held at a private room inside a steakhouse in downtown Chicago. Dark wood paneling, crystal chandeliers, white linen tablecloths pressed so stiff they barely bent when touched. My son Daniel had insisted on keeping it elegant but intimate. 20 guests, close family, a few of his future in-laws. I arrived 15 minutes early. At 72, I still take pride in punctuality. I wore a deep emerald silk dress I'd saved for special occasions. My late husband, Arthur, used to say that green made my eyes look younger than they were. I styled my silver hair carefully that afternoon. A touch of powder, a thin line of lipstick. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind myself I was still visible. The hostess led me to the private dining room. A long rectangular table sat in the center, already set with wine glasses and folded napkins shaped like roses. I could hear laughter from the hallway, Daniel's voice, bright and confident, and hers, Vanessa, my daughter-in-law-to-be. She swept into the room moments after I did, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like punctuation marks. She was wearing a fitted white suit, bridal without being bridal. Polished. Intentional. She air-kissed both my cheeks. "You look lovely, Eleanor," she said. Her smile was flawless. Too flawless. "Thank you, dear," I replied. I meant it politely, not warmly. I walked toward my assigned seat and reached for the small place card resting against the folded napkin. That's when I saw it. Not Eleanor Hayes. Not grandmother of the bride. Just two words. Family sponsor. The ink shimmered slightly under the chandelier light. Whoever had ordered the custom cards had chosen a serif font. Elegant. Formal. Deliberate. For a second, I thought it must be a printing mistake. I turned the card over. Blank. I looked around the table. Daniel's card read, "Proud Father." Vanessa's read, "Future Mrs. Collins." Her parents had their names printed normally. Even her younger sister, barely 20, had "Maid of Honor" written beneath her name. Only mine reduced to a role. A financial one. I felt something tighten quietly in my chest. Not sharp. Not explosive. Just tight. Vanessa appeared at my side again. "Oh good. You found your seat," she said lightly. Her eyes flickered to the card and back to my face, gauging. "Yes," I replied. "I did." She tilted her head slightly. "We thought it would be cute. You know, since you've been so generous helping with the wedding." Generous. That was one way to phrase it. 3 months earlier, Daniel had called me on a Sunday afternoon. "Mom, we found the perfect venue," he'd said. "It's a vineyard upstate. Vanessa loves it." "How wonderful," I'd told him. There had been a pause. A soft clearing of his throat. "It's just the deposit is steep. We're stretching a bit thin with the house renovation. I was wondering if you might." I hadn't let him finish. "I'll handle it," I'd said. Arthur and I had built our savings slowly over 45 years. He ran a small manufacturing business. I managed the books. We weren't flashy. We were careful. After he passed 5 years ago, Daniel became my only child. Helping him never felt like a burden. It felt natural. Since then, there had been the catering upgrade, the floral redesign, the string quartet Vanessa had her heart set on. Each request wrapped in sweetness. Each conversation ending with Daniel saying, "You're amazing, Mom. We couldn't do this without you." And apparently, they couldn't let anyone forget it either. Guests began to filter in. Vanessa's parents took their seats across from me. Her mother gave me a tight smile. "We've heard so much about you," she said. I nodded. "I hope it's been kind." "Oh," she replied, lifting her wine glass. "Mostly about how supportive you've been." Supportive. The word landed differently this time. Dinner began with a toast from Daniel. He stood tall, confident, handsome in his tailored navy suit. For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to run into my arms after school. The one who once cried when his goldfish died. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," he began. "This wedding wouldn't be possible without the love and support of our families." He glanced at me briefly, and especially to the person who made sure this dream could actually happen. A few guests chuckled softly. Vanessa squeezed his hand. "Mom," he said, raising his glass toward me. Our very own family sponsor. There it was again. Laughter this time. Louder. Not cruel laughter. Not vicious. But amused. I felt 20 pairs of eyes shift toward me, waiting for a reaction. A blush. A gracious nod. I lifted my glass slowly. To love, I said calmly. And to knowing exactly what it costs. There was an awkward beat. Then more laughter, assuming I was joking. Vanessa smiled widely. Daniel relaxed. The appetizers arrived. Throughout dinner, I noticed small things. Vanessa correcting Daniel when he misspoke about the honeymoon location. Her father casually mentioning how fortunate it was that Daniel had such strong financial backing. Her sister whispering something while glancing at my place card. I ate quietly. Filet mignon. Roasted asparagus. A glass of red wine I barely tasted. Every now and then, Vanessa would lean across the table and touch my hand. We're so grateful, she'd say. Grateful people rarely need to announce it that often. Halfway through dessert, Daniel excused himself to take a phone call. Vanessa followed shortly after, claiming she needed to check on the cake arrangement. They stepped into the hallway. I remained seated. A few minutes later, as I stood to use the restroom, I passed near the partially closed door of the private lounge adjacent to our room. Their voices drifted through the narrow gap. She'll keep paying, Vanessa said softly. She always does. Daniel sighed. I know, but we should slow down after this. Why? She replied lightly. She has more than she needs. And it's not like she spends it on anything else. There was a pause. We just have to keep her feeling included. Included. I stood still in the hallway, my hand resting on the wall for balance. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I didn't burst into the room demanding explanations. I simply listened. Then I turned back toward the dining room. By the time they returned to the table, I was seated again. My napkin folded neatly beside my plate. My place card still standing upright. Vanessa slipped into her chair with a bright smile. Everything okay? She asked. Perfectly, I replied. Dessert was served. Speeches continued. Plans were discussed. Future grandchildren were joked about. And I smiled when appropriate. Laughed when expected. Listened carefully. Because in that moment, something shifted inside me. I had not been honored. I had been budgeted. They thought I was just the sponsor. What they didn't realize, I was also the owner of the vineyard. And the house Daniel believed was partially his, still entirely in my name. I sipped the last of my wine. Let them laugh. Let them toast. Let them print whatever title they liked on a piece of cardstock. I had no intention of correcting them tonight. Some lessons are better delivered quietly. And very, very legally. The next morning, I woke up at 5:12 a.m. I know the exact time because the digital clock beside my bed glowed red in the dark, and I had been staring at it for several minutes before I fully accepted that sleep wasn't coming back. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place that had once held birthday parties, piano lessons, and the sound of Arthur humming while reading the Sunday paper. I lay there for a moment, replaying the words from the hallway. She'll keep paying. She always does. It wasn't the money that hurt. It was the certainty, the confidence in her voice, the assumption that I was predictable, manageable, harmless. I sat up slowly and reached for my robe. The hardwood floor felt cool under my feet as I walked toward the kitchen. I didn't turn on the overhead lights, just the small lamp over the stove. Soft yellow. Enough to see. I brewed coffee the way Arthur liked it. 2 scoops of dark roast. A pinch of cinnamon. Even after 5 years, I still made it that way out of habit. Old habits aren't weakness. They're anchors. I carried my mug to the dining table and opened my leather folder, the one that held copies of our estate documents. Arthur and I had updated everything 6 months before he passed. Not because we were afraid, because we were practical. The house was an irrevocable living trust. Primary beneficiary me. Upon my death, assets divided according to conditions we had drafted carefully. Daniel would inherit the majority, but not automatically. Arthur had insisted on that clause. If he ever marries someone who doesn't respect you, he'd said one evening while reviewing paperwork, I want you protected. At the time, I had laughed. Daniel would never allow that. Arthur had looked at me over his glasses. Love makes people overlook things. He wasn't wrong. I turned the page slowly. There it was. A stipulation regarding financial exploitation or coercion. If evidence suggested manipulation intended to extract funds under false pretenses, inheritance terms could be restructured at the discretion of the trustee. The trustee was not Daniel. It was me. I closed the folder gently. Outside, the early Chicago sky was still gray. A thin layer of frost covered the backyard grass. The maple tree Arthur planted 20 years ago stood bare against the morning light. I wasn't angry. Anger is loud. What I felt was clarity. By 8:30 a.m., I was dressed in a navy wool coat and low heels. I drove myself downtown, merging onto Lakeshore Drive with steady hands. Traffic was light. The radio played softly, but I barely heard it. I parked near the office of Harold Whitman, our family attorney for nearly 3 decades. Harold was 78 now, sharp as ever, discreet, loyal. When I walked into his office, his assistant looked surprised. "Mrs. Hayes, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I said gently. I was hoping Harold might have a few minutes. He did. He always did. His office smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. He stood as I entered. "Eleanor," he said warmly, "what brings you in on such short notice?" I took a seat across from his desk and folded my gloves neatly in my lap. "I'd like to review my estate plan," I said. He studied my face for a moment. Not prying, just attentive. "Has something changed?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "My perspective." We spent the next hour going through documents line by line. I asked precise questions. What qualifies as financial coercion? How is intent established? What documentation is required to modify beneficiary structure? Harold answered each one carefully. "You're concerned about Daniel?" he finally asked. "I'm concerned about influence," I said. "And about patterns." He nodded slowly. "You have options," he told me. "Significant ones." By the time I left his office, I had initiated 3 changes. First, I appointed a co-trustee, an independent fiduciary firm, to oversee any large distributions. Second, I placed a conditional hold on additional wedding-related transfers until formal reimbursement agreements were drafted. Third, I began the process of restructuring the vineyard property ownership into a separate holding entity. Daniel believed I had simply written checks. He didn't know I had retained equity. He didn't know my name was the only one on the deed. I drove home before noon. There were 2 missed calls from Daniel on my phone. A text followed shortly after. "Mom, Vanessa and I were thinking about upgrading the reception lighting package. Can we talk later?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back, "Of course. Let's schedule a meeting. I'd like to review everything together." 3 dots appeared almost immediately. "Review what?" I set the phone down without answering. That afternoon, I pulled out a small notebook from the kitchen drawer and began writing dates. Deposit for vineyard. Catering increase. Floral redesign. Live quartet. Each payment. Each request. Each conversation. Patterns are clearer when written in ink. By evening, the house felt different. Not emptier. Stronger. For the first time since Arthur passed, I realized something important. I had spent 5 years trying to be indispensable. Trying to be generous enough, supportive enough, flexible enough that Daniel would never feel the absence of his father. But generosity without boundaries doesn't create love. It creates expectation. And expectation, left unchecked, turns into entitlement. At 7:42 p.m., Daniel called again. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Mom," he said, his tone easy. "Vanessa mentioned you wanted to review things?" "Yes," I replied. "I think it's time we clarify roles." He laughed lightly. "Roles?" "Yes," I said, glancing at the folder resting on my coffee table. Last night made a few things very clear. There was a pause on the line. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair and looked around the living room, at the framed family photos, the antique clock, the life Arthur and I had built brick by brick. "I mean," I said softly, "if I'm going to be labeled the sponsor, I'd like the contract to match the title." Silence. Not confusion. Not yet. But something had shifted. And this time, I wasn't the only one who could see it. Daniel came over 2 nights later. He didn't bring Vanessa. That told me more than he realized. It was just after 6 p.m. when his SUV pulled into the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as he stepped out, adjusting his coat against the March wind. He looked tired. Not defeated. Just unsettled. I opened the door before he rang the bell. "Hi, Mom. Come in." "Daniel." He stepped inside, glancing around as if the house might look different somehow. It didn't. The same framed photos lined the hallway. The same grandfather clock ticked steadily in the living room. Consistency can be comforting. Or intimidating. "I made tea," I said. "Chamomile." He gave a small smile. "You always know what I need." I didn't answer that. We sat at the dining table, the same table where he used to do his homework, while Arthur reviewed invoices across from him. I placed a neat stack of papers between us. He looked down at them, then back at me. What's all this? Documentation, I replied calmly. Of wedding-related expenses. He shifted in his seat. Mom, you don't have to. I know, I said gently. That's the point. Silence stretched for a moment. I feel like you're upset about something, he said carefully. I'm not upset, I told him. I'm adjusting. His brow tightened slightly. Adjusting to what? To clarity. I slid the top page toward him. It was a printed summary of transfers made over the last 3 months. Dates. Amounts. Notes. Deposit. Vineyard. $42,000 catering upgrade. $18. 500 floral redesign. $11. 200 live quartet. $9,000 lighting package preliminary. Pinning his eyes widened slightly at the total. Mom, I didn't realize it added up like that. That's usually how these things work, I said softly. Individually, they feel small. Together, they tell a story. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw the way he does when he's thinking. You know we're grateful. I'm sure you believe that, I replied. He hesitated. This is about the dinner, isn't it? I held his gaze steadily. Yes. He exhaled. Mom, that was just a joke. Vanessa thought it would be cute. Cute, I repeated. He shifted again. It wasn't meant to offend you. I'm not offended, I said. I'm informed. The word hung between us. About what, he asked. I didn't mention the hallway. I didn't repeat Vanessa's words. I didn't need to. About the dynamic, I answered instead. About how I'm being perceived. He looked confused now. Or maybe cautious. You're my mother. And you've always helped. Yes, I said. I have. I folded my hands neatly on the table. But help should be offered. Not assumed. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. You think we're using you? He asked quietly. I think I said carefully. That lines have blurred. He stared at the spreadsheet again. We never meant to make you feel like an ATM. I noticed he didn't deny the pattern. Only the intention. Intent doesn't erase impact. I replied. The clock in the hallway chimed softly, 7 o'clock. Daniel looked older in that moment. Not like the confident man giving toasts in private dining rooms. Just a son trying to recalibrate. So what are you saying? He asked. I'm saying, I replied, that if I'm going to contribute to this wedding, it will be structured. Structured how? As a formal sponsorship. He blinked. What? I allowed myself the faintest smile. You introduced me publicly as the family sponsor, I said. So let's formalize it. He stared at me, unsure whether I was serious. I've drafted an agreement, I continued. Any additional funds will be issued as a documented contribution with clear boundaries. No open-ended requests. No assumptions. His tone sharpened slightly. You want us to sign a contract? For our wedding. I want clarity, I said evenly. Clarity protects relationships. He shook his head slowly. Vanessa's not going to like that. That's all right, I replied. This isn't about liking. He studied me more closely now. You've changed, he said. No, I answered quietly. I've remembered. There was a long pause. Does this have anything to do with anything else? He asked carefully. He was fishing. I met his eyes without blinking. Is there something else I should know about? His jaw tightened. No, then this is simply about financial boundaries, I said calmly. He stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the backyard. The maple tree branches swayed lightly in the evening wind. You've always trusted me, he said. I still do, I replied. Trust and oversight are not opposites. He let out a slow breath. So what happens if we don't sign? Then I'll wish you a beautiful wedding, I said, and attend as a guest. He turned around sharply. You'd pull your support? I would redefine it. Another silence. This one heavier. Finally, he nodded slowly. Let me talk to Vanessa. Of course, I said. He picked up his coat and moved toward the door. Before stepping out, he paused. You know I love you, right? I know, I said. And I did. Love wasn't the problem. Entitlement was. After he left, I remained standing in the foyer for a few moments, listening to the sound of his engine fade down the street. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. There's a difference. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. We're surprised by your sudden need for contracts. We thought family meant trust. I read it twice. Then I typed back. Family also means respect. The typing indicator appeared almost instantly, then disappeared. No response. I set my phone down and turned off the lights one by one, moving through the house slowly. For the first time in months, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And somewhere between the place card and the paperwork, something important had shifted. They had labeled me the sponsor. Now they would learn what sponsorship actually requires. Vanessa called the next afternoon. Not a text. A call. That alone told me Daniel had shown her the agreement. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Vanessa. Her voice was bright. Controlled. Polite in the way people are polite when they're choosing their words carefully. Hi, Eleanor. I just wanted to clear the air. I'm glad, I said. So do I. There was a brief pause. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she began. Daniel said you felt uncomfortable at the engagement dinner. I wasn't uncomfortable, I replied. I was observant. Another pause. The family sponsor thing was meant to honor you, she said lightly. You've been incredibly generous. I'm aware, I said calmly. Silence stretched for a beat too long. We just didn't expect paperwork, she continued. It feels transactional. I walked slowly toward the living room window as she spoke, looking out at the street. A neighbor was walking his dog. Normal afternoon. Ordinary. Vanessa, I said gently, money is already transactional. Paperwork simply makes it transparent. Her tone shifted slightly. Are you planning to pull funding if we don't sign? I didn't answer immediately. I'm planning to align expectations, I said instead. She exhaled softly. Not frustrated. Not yet. But calculating. Daniel's been stressed, she said. There's a lot happening. I'm sure there is. We thought you were happy to help. I replied. Until I realized help had become assumed. There it was again. That word. Assumed. She didn't respond to that directly. Well, she said after a moment, my parents think this sets a strange precedent. I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. Your parents are welcome to structure their contributions however they like. They're contributing in other ways. I'm aware. I let that sit. Are you accusing us of something? She asked finally. No, I said calmly. I'm preventing something. The line went quiet. For a moment, I could almost hear her recalculating. This feels like a lack of trust, she said. Trust, I replied softly, is not the absence of boundaries. Another silence. Then, in a tone just slightly sharper, Daniel would never take advantage of you. I know, I said, and I would never encourage that. I hope not. There was something in my voice that made her stop pushing. Because I wasn't emotional. I wasn't defensive. I was steady. Well, she said, smoothing her tone again, we'll review the document. Take your time, I replied. The next vendor payment isn't due for another 10 days. That caught her off guard. How do you know that? I keep records, I said. When the call ended, I placed my phone down carefully and sat at the kitchen table. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. It was about positioning. Later that evening, Daniel called again. She's upset, he said without greeting. I gathered. She feels like you're punishing us. I'm not. It just feels sudden. It isn't, I said. It's cumulative. He was quiet. You heard something, didn't you? He asked finally. I didn't answer immediately. Why would you ask that? I said instead. Because this isn't just about a place card, he replied. No, it wasn't. But I wasn't going to hand him the hallway conversation. Not yet. Daniel, I said softly. Do you believe generosity has limits? He hesitated. I guess everything does. Good, I replied. Then we agree. He sounded tired. You're making this harder than it needs to be. On the contrary, I said. I'm making it clearer. Another long pause. What if we refuse? He asked quietly. Then I attend the wedding as your mother, I said. Not as your financier. The word hung in the air. You'd really step back like that? Yes. He inhaled slowly. Vanessa thinks you're testing her. I'm observing her. He didn't like that answer. I love her, he said. I know. And I love you. I know that too. Then why does it feel like you're choosing money over us? I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes briefly. Because that was the simplest narrative. The comfortable one. I'm choosing dignity, I said quietly. Silence. Real silence this time. Not confusion. Not irritation. Something deeper. After we ended the call, I walked upstairs to Arthur's old study. The room still smelled faintly of leather and cedar. His desk remained organized the way he had left it. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a thin envelope. Inside were the original vineyard purchase documents. Arthur had bought that property 15 years ago as an investment. Daniel had always assumed it was a joint family asset. It wasn't. It was held in a separate entity, under my name. I ran my fingers lightly over the paper. They'll keep her feeling included. That's what Vanessa had said. Included. Not respected. Not consulted. Included. I placed the documents back into the envelope and closed the drawer. In the hallway, the grandfather clock chimed 9. The wedding was still 6 weeks away. There was time. Time reveals patterns. And pressure reveals character. They thought this was about contracts. It wasn't. It was about whether they saw me as family or funding. 3 days passed without a signature. No email. No returned draft with comments. Just silence. Silence can mean many things. Resistance, strategy, or consultation. On the 4th morning, I received a calendar invitation. Wedding budget review, 10 a.m., Saturday. Location, my house. Not a cafe. Not their condo. My house. That was deliberate. Saturday arrived cold and bright. The kind of Chicago morning where sunlight looks warm, but the air cuts sharp against your skin. I had already been awake for hours when they rang the bell. Daniel stood slightly ahead of Vanessa. Protective posture. Vanessa wore a cream sweater dress and carried a leather folder. She smiled when I opened the door. Good morning, Eleanor. Good morning, I replied. Come in. I led them into the dining room. The same table. The same chairs. The same quiet clock ticking in the hallway. But this time, there were 3 folders waiting. One in front of each seat. Daniel noticed immediately. You've prepared, he said. I always do, I answered. We sat. Vanessa placed her folder on the table, but didn't open it. We reviewed the agreement, she began smoothly. Some of it feels formal. It is formal, I said. She nodded as if that confirmed something. Weddings are emotional events, she continued. Introducing contracts makes it feel like business. I folded my hands calmly. It became business the moment invoices were sent. Daniel shifted in his chair. We're not trying to take advantage of you, he said. That's not what this is. I understand that's your belief, I replied. Vanessa's eyes flickered slightly at that phrasing. My parents were surprised, she added. They think it suggests mistrust. I'm not asking them to sign anything, I said evenly. Only the parties receiving funds. Daniel exhaled through his nose. So what exactly are you worried about? I opened my folder and slid a single page across the table. It wasn't the agreement. It was a timeline. Dates. Transfers. Conversations. Each one documented. Vanessa's gaze scanned it quickly. This feels like an audit, she said. It's called awareness, I replied. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, are you planning to cut us off? The question was direct this time. No, I said. I'm planning to define limits. Vanessa finally opened her folder. We're willing to sign something, she said carefully. But we'd like to remove the clause about discretionary restructuring. There it was. The clause Arthur had insisted on. The one allowing me to adjust future distributions in cases of financial manipulation. That clause stays, I said. Her smile thinned slightly. That implies you think we would manipulate you. It implies I won't allow it. Daniel's jaw tightened. You're making this about something bigger than a wedding. Yes, I said quietly. I am. Silence. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. If we sign this, she asked, does that mean you'll continue funding the remaining expenses? Yes, I replied. Within the agreed amount. And if we don't, I'll attend the wedding with a gift. Daniel looked down at the table. That would embarrass us, he said softly. I studied him for a long moment. Embarrassment usually comes from expectation, I said. Not from reality. Vanessa's fingers tightened slightly around her pen. You've changed your tone with us, she said. No, I replied. I've changed my boundaries. The room felt smaller somehow. Daniel looked at Vanessa. She gave the slightest nod. He reached for the pen. But before signing, he looked at me. Did we do something specific? He asked quietly. Or is this just precaution? I held his gaze. You labeled me publicly, I said. Now, I'm defining privately. He looked confused. Vanessa didn't. She knew exactly what I meant. But she said nothing. Daniel signed first. His signature familiar. Confident. Slightly slanted. Vanessa followed. Her handwriting precise. Controlled. She placed the pen down deliberately. There, she said. We trust you. I nodded. And now, I replied, I trust the structure. I gathered the signed copies and slid one back toward them. Vendor payments will resume Monday, I said calmly. Daniel stood up. Thank you, he said. Vanessa smiled again. We appreciate everything you're doing. I walked them to the door. As Daniel stepped outside, Vanessa paused for half a second behind him. You know, she said softly, families shouldn't feel like negotiations. I met her eyes steadily. Families shouldn't feel like investments either. Her smile didn't falter, but something in her eyes cooled. After they left, I locked the door and leaned lightly against it. Not out of exhaustion, out of reflection. They had signed. But signatures don't reveal intent. They reveal compliance. The wedding was 5 weeks away. The contracts were in place. The money would flow carefully. But something else had shifted too. Vanessa had tested how far she could push. Now she knew there was resistance. And when pressure meets resistance, it doesn't disappear. It adapts. I walked back to the dining table and placed the signed documents inside my leather folder. This wasn't over. It had only become structured. And structure, I've learned, is where truth eventually surfaces. The first payment after the contract cleared on Monday morning. $12,400 for the upgraded lighting package. I authorized it at 9:17 a.m. after reviewing the invoice twice. There's something about signing a check when terms are defined. It feels different. Not generous. Not indulgent. Intentional. By Wednesday, Vanessa was texting again, but differently. Not requests. Updates. Floral mock-up came in. Want to see photos? Venue confirmed final headcount. Thinking ivory roses instead of blush. Polite. Inclusive. Structured behavior produces structured responses. But I've lived long enough to know that compliance doesn't equal change. It equals adaptation. That Friday evening, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly. He didn't call ahead. He rarely used to. As a teenager, he'd burst through the door shouting, "Mom, you won't believe what happened." Now he rang the bell like a guest. I opened the door. "Hi," he said, holding a small bakery box. "Brought you lemon cake from that place on Clark Street you like." "That's thoughtful," I replied, stepping aside. We moved into the kitchen. I sliced 2 pieces and poured coffee. He looked around like he was measuring something invisible. "You seem calmer," he said. "I am. About everything. I prefer clarity to confusion." He nodded slowly. "Vanessa thinks you don't trust her." I stirred my coffee gently. "Trust isn't a feeling," I said. "It's a pattern." He frowned slightly. "She's trying," he added. "Trying what?" "To make you feel included." Included. The word again. I set my spoon down. "Daniel," I said softly. "Inclusion is when someone is invited, not when someone is funding." He shifted in his seat. "You're reading too much into that dinner." "No," I replied. "I'm reading exactly what was written." He went quiet. After a moment, he said, "Vanessa suggested we have you speak at the rehearsal dinner." I raised an eyebrow slightly. "That's generous." She thought it would show appreciation. I held his gaze. "Appreciation isn't performance-based," I said, "but I'll consider it." He nodded. There was something else on his mind. I could see it. "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated. "Vanessa's parents are contributing to the honeymoon now," he said. "They wanted to make sure it felt balanced." Balanced. Interesting choice of word. "That's good," I replied. "It's important that no one feels leveraged." There it was. I studied him carefully. "Do you feel leveraged?" I asked. He shook his head quickly. "No, I just don't want tension." "Tension doesn't come from boundaries," I said. "It comes from resistance to them." He didn't argue. After he left, I walked upstairs to Arthur's study again. I opened the drawer and removed the vineyard documents once more. Not because I doubted anything. Because I like to see the truth in writing. The vineyard had appreciated significantly over the past decade. Land values upstate had risen. A boutique hotel developer had made an inquiry the previous year. I hadn't responded, but I could. The wedding was scheduled to take place there in just over a month. Daniel believed it was symbolic. Vanessa believed it was aesthetic. Neither of them understood its leverage. The following week, something subtle changed. Vendor calls began coming directly to me instead of through Daniel. Not because they were instructed to, because my name was on the primary contract. The event planner called Tuesday morning. "Mrs. Hayes, just confirming the final guest count adjustment." I glanced at the spreadsheet. "It's capped at 150, I said. "No increase." There was a pause. "Understood." That evening, Vanessa texted. "Planner said guest count is locked." We were considering adding a few more. I replied, "As agreed in the sponsorship terms." 3 dots appeared, then stopped. 10 minutes later, "Of course." Short. Controlled. Pressure was building. Not explosive pressure. Structural pressure. And structure reveals alignment, or cracks. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a notification from my bank. A large attempted transfer request. Initiated online. Declined automatically due to new dual authorization settings. Amount, $25,000. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The request had originated from Daniel's login credentials, but the IP address was unfamiliar. I didn't panic. I didn't accuse. I called the bank calmly. Please flag any future transfer attempts above $10,000 for direct verbal confirmation, I said. Yes, Mrs. Hayes. After hanging up, I sat very still. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was testing the perimeter. An hour later, Daniel called. Hey, Mom, he began casually. Quick question. Did you change the bank settings? Yes, I said. Oh, I tried to move funds for the final vendor payment, and it didn't go through. Correct. Silence. I thought we had authorization, he said. For scheduled payments, I replied. Not discretionary transfers. It was for the wedding. Then it can wait until we review the invoice together. He exhaled. You don't need to monitor everything. I'm not monitoring, I said calmly. I'm managing. Another silence. This one heavier. Vanessa's stressed, he said. I imagine she is. You don't have to make this harder. I'm not, I said quietly. I'm making it safer. The line went quiet. Not argumentative. Measured. Finally, he said, okay, we'll send the invoice. When the call ended, I placed my phone face down on the table. There it was. Not just entitlement. Escalation. They had adapted to structure. Now they were testing limits. Good. Limits only mean something when they're tested. The wedding was 14 days away. The vineyard contract was airtight. The sponsorship agreement was signed. The bank's safeguards were active. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was anticipating. And anticipation is where power quietly settles. 2 days after the failed transfer, Vanessa asked to meet alone. Not with Daniel. Not as a couple. Just us. She suggested a small cafe near the lake. Neutral ground. I agreed. Saturday morning was cold but clear. The kind of early spring day where the wind still bites, but sunlight makes people hopeful. I arrived 5 minutes early and chose a table by the window. Vanessa walked in exactly at 10. Cream coat. Hair perfectly styled. Composed. She smiled when she saw me. Thank you for meeting me, Eleanor. Of course, I said. We ordered coffee. Black for me. Oat milk latte for her. She didn't waste time. I think things have gotten tense, she began. They've gotten structured, I replied. She gave a small, controlled laugh. You're very precise with words. I try to be. She leaned forward slightly. Daniel told me about the bank flag. I held her gaze. Yes. He said you seemed concerned. I was informed. Her fingers tightened slightly around her cup. It was just a timing issue, she said. We were finalizing a vendor, and he thought it would be easier to move funds directly, without sending the invoice first. I asked gently. She paused. We didn't think it would be a problem. That, I said softly, is exactly the problem. Her jaw set for a brief second. You think we're trying to take advantage of you. I think you're comfortable assuming access. She didn't like that. We're about to become family, she said. There shouldn't be this much distance. Family isn't defined by access to accounts, I replied. Her eyes sharpened slightly. Is this about control? No, I said calmly. It's about respect. She studied me carefully now. Not dismissive. Not sweet. Measuring. Daniel feels like you're pulling away. I'm repositioning. From us. From assumption. There was a long silence between us. The cafe hummed softly with other conversations. Cups clinking. Chairs shifting. She lowered her voice slightly. Can I be honest? Please. My parents think you're testing me. I waited. They think you're trying to see how much I can tolerate before pushing back. I almost smiled. And what do you think? I asked. She hesitated. I think you don't trust me. I let that sit in the air. Trust, I said slowly, is earned over time. Not granted because of a ring. Her posture stiffened slightly. I love your son. I don't doubt that. But you think I'm after your money. I think, I said evenly, that money changes behavior. Even good people. Her eyes flickered. That's unfair. Is it? Another pause. You heard something, didn't you? She asked suddenly. There it was. Direct. I held her gaze without blinking. Why would you ask that? Because this level of scrutiny doesn't come from nowhere. She wasn't wrong. But she wasn't getting confirmation. I pay attention, I said calmly. That's all. She leaned back slowly. You're not going to tell me what this is really about. I already have. She studied me for another few seconds. Then her tone shifted, subtle, but noticeable. You know the vineyard means a lot to Daniel. I know. He's always seen it as part of his future. I folded my hands on the table. It is, I said. Under conditions. Her eyes narrowed slightly. What conditions? The ones his father and I established long ago. She didn't respond immediately. Are you planning to change anything? She asked carefully. I've already made adjustments, I said. Her breath caught, just slightly. What kind of adjustments? Protective ones. For the first time, her composure cracked. You can't punish us for something you think might happen. I'm not punishing anyone, I said calmly. I'm preventing harm. She looked frustrated now. You're making this adversarial. No, I replied. I'm making it transparent. The silence this time was heavier. She set her coffee down. What do you want from me? She asked quietly. Honest question. I want you to understand something, I said. And that is, I am not an extension of your budget. She stared at me. I am your husband's mother, not your investor. Her lips pressed together. I never saw you that way. I know, I said softly. You saw me as stable. She didn't respond. Because stable sounds kinder than accessible. After a moment, she asked, what would make you comfortable? I considered that carefully. Consistency, I said. And accountability. She nodded slowly. I can do that. We'll see. We finished our coffee in silence. As we stood to leave, she adjusted her coat and looked at me again. You're stronger than Daniel realizes, she said. I raised him, I replied. She gave a small, unreadable smile. And I'm not afraid of strong women, she added. That's good, I said. You'll be marrying into one. When I walked back to my car, the wind felt colder. Not because of the weather, because the tone had shifted. This was no longer about wedding details. It was about territory. And territory becomes visible when lines are drawn. The wedding was 12 days away. The vineyard contract was secure. The bank safeguards were active. But something else was happening beneath the surface. Vanessa wasn't retreating. She was recalibrating. And recalibration is often the final stage before a real move is made. The wedding rehearsal was held the evening before the ceremony. The vineyard looked almost unreal at sunset. Soft gold lights stretching across the rows of vines. White chairs arranged in perfect lines facing the small wooden arch Daniel and Vanessa had chosen. String lights suspended between tall posts, glowing faintly as the sky darkened. It was beautiful. I won't pretend it wasn't. Beauty and tension can coexist quite comfortably. I arrived early. Again, the event planner was already there, clipboard in hand, directing florists and sound technicians. She smiled when she saw me. Mrs. Hayes, everything is said exactly as approved. As approved, I repeated. Those words matter. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later, surrounded by bridesmaids in silk robes and controlled excitement. She spotted me and walked over with effortless confidence. Isn't it perfect? She asked, gesturing toward the arch. It is, I said truthfully. Daniel joined us shortly after, looking nervous but happy. He hugged me. Tomorrow's the big day, he said. Yes, I replied. It is. The rehearsal itself was smooth. The officiant walked them through timing. The bridal party practiced their pacing. Laughter floated through the evening air. From a distance, we looked like any other family preparing for a celebration. But I noticed things. I noticed Vanessa's father speaking quietly with the event planner near the catering station. I noticed Daniel checking his phone repeatedly. And I noticed the planner walking toward me about 30 minutes later with a slight crease between her brows. Mrs. Hayes, she said gently, there's been a last-minute addition. What kind of addition? An expanded champagne tower, an upgraded dessert display. The Collins family approved it this afternoon. The Collins family. Not me. Approved how? I asked calmly. She hesitated. They mentioned funds would be available. From which account? I asked. She looked confused. I assumed it was included in the overall budget. It is not, I said evenly. The planner's expression shifted. Oh, I glanced across the vineyard. Vanessa was laughing with her bridesmaids, completely at ease. Recalibrating. I turned back to the planner. Please hold off on implementing any additions until I review the invoice. Of course, she said quickly. A few minutes later, Vanessa approached me. I heard there was a question about the champagne tower, she said lightly. Yes, I replied. It's just a small upgrade, she continued. My parents thought it would elevate the reception. That's lovely, I said. They're welcome to cover it. Her smile thinned slightly. Well, we assumed it would fall under the existing arrangement. There is no existing arrangement for unapproved upgrades, I said calmly. Daniel stepped in at that point. Mom, it's not a big deal, he said quietly. It's just champagne. It's just precedent, I replied. Vanessa's eyes sharpened. We're talking about a few $1,000s, she said. And I'm talking about process, I answered. Silence settled briefly between us. Guests from the rehearsal party began drifting toward the reception area where dinner would be served. Vanessa lowered her voice. Do you really want to have this conversation tonight? I'd prefer not to, I said, which is why it shouldn't have been necessary. Daniel rubbed his forehead. We didn't think you'd object. That, I said softly, is exactly why I do. Vanessa inhaled slowly. My parents already told the planner to proceed. Then they can confirm payment directly, I replied. Her composure slipped for a second. You're making this uncomfortable. No, I said. I'm making it accurate. Daniel looked between us. Can we not do this right now, he asked. We can absolutely not do this, I said calmly. If the addition is paused. The planner, who had been hovering nearby, stepped closer. I'll suspend the order until billing is clarified, she said quickly. Thank you, I replied. Vanessa's jaw tightened. For a moment, I saw it clearly. Not embarrassment. Not hurt. I saw calculation. She leaned closer to me, her voice almost pleasant. You really don't want to look generous, do you? I met her gaze steadily. Generosity without consent isn't generosity. Her eyes held mine for a long second. Then she smiled again. Public smile. Rehearsed smile. Of course, she said brightly. We'll sort it out. Dinner began shortly after. Long farmhouse tables set under twinkling lights. Plates of roasted chicken and seasonal vegetables passed from hand to hand. Laughter rising into the night air. I participated politely, clapped when appropriate, smiled in photographs. But halfway through dinner, Daniel's phone buzzed loudly on the table. He glanced at it. His expression changed. What is it? Vanessa asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. Then he looked at me. Mom, did you contact the holding company about the vineyard? Yes, I said calmly. When? This week. Why? Because ownership structure should be clarified before a major public event. Vanessa's fork paused midair. What does that mean? She asked. It means, I said evenly, that beginning tomorrow, the vineyard is no longer listed as a family property. It is a private asset under separate management. Silence. Heavy this time. Daniel stared at me. You changed the status? I finalized what already existed. Vanessa's composure cracked again. So the wedding proceeds exactly as contracted, I said. Nothing changes operationally. But symbolically, she pressed. Symbolism, I replied softly, should never replace legality. Daniel looked stunned. Why now, he asked. Because assumptions were expanding, I said. And I prefer clarity before celebration. The string lights above us flickered slightly in the breeze. Around us, guests continued eating, laughing, unaware. Vanessa set her fork down carefully. You really think we were trying to take something from you? I held her gaze. I think you were testing what was already yours. Silence. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just real. Tomorrow was the wedding. The vineyard was secure. The contracts were signed. The bank was protected. And now, so was the narrative. Because this was never about champagne towers. It was about ownership. And tonight, ownership had just been redefined. The wedding day began quietly. No calls. No texts. No last-minute requests. Just a pale blue sky stretching over the vineyard and a cool breeze moving gently through the rows of vines. I arrived early, as I always do. The staff was already in place. White chairs aligned perfectly. The floral arrangements were understated. Elegant ivory roses, not blush. The champagne tower had not been expanded. Interesting. The event planner walked over to me with a polite nod. Everything is proceeding as contracted, Mrs. Hayes. As contracted, I repeated. There is comfort in precision. Guests began arriving around 4 in the afternoon. Women in pastel dresses. Men adjusting ties. Soft murmurs of admiration at the view. Vanessa appeared shortly before the ceremony, radiant in a fitted lace gown. She looked beautiful, confident, composed. If she was unsettled by last night's revelation about the vineyard, she didn't show it. Daniel, on the other hand, looked distracted. He hugged me before taking his place at the front. You didn't have to do that yesterday, he said quietly. Yes, I did, I replied. It feels like you don't trust us at all. I trust what is written, I said gently. The music began. The ceremony was graceful, emotional, genuine. When Daniel saw Vanessa walking down the aisle, his eyes softened in a way that reminded me of the boy he used to be. Love was real. That was never the question. They exchanged vows. Rings. Applause followed. Husband and wife. And then came the reception. Long tables set under the open sky. String lights glowing brighter as dusk settled. Soft music playing near the dance floor. Toasts began after dinner. Vanessa's father spoke first. Polished. Controlled. He thanked the guests. Praised the couple. Mentioned the extraordinary setting that made tonight possible. He glanced briefly at me. A pause. Then moved on. Daniel's best man followed. Jokes. Laughter. Then Daniel stood. He cleared his throat. I want to thank everyone for being here, he began. This vineyard has always meant a lot to me growing up. It represents family. My gaze remained steady. He hesitated. And I especially want to thank my mom for everything she's done to make this day possible. Polite applause. He looked at me. There was something different in his eyes now. Not entitlement. Not certainty. Uncertainty. Vanessa squeezed his hand and stepped forward to add something. We're so grateful for the support we've received, she said. From both sides of the family. Balanced. Measured. Careful. Then she surprised me. And I want to say something personally to Eleanor, she continued. The room quieted slightly. She turned toward me. I know things have felt tense lately, she said, smiling gently. But I want you to know I see how much you care. And I hope we can build something stronger from here. It was a public olive branch. Strategic, but sincere enough in tone to make it effective. All eyes turned to me. Waiting. Again. For a reaction. I stood slowly. At 72, I no longer rush when rooms grow quiet. Marriage, I said calmly, isn't built on what's given. The guests listened closely. It's built on what's respected. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. I wish you both a life where generosity and gratitude move in the same direction. Silence. Then applause. Warm. Polite. Relieved. Vanessa held my gaze for a brief second. This wasn't defeat. This wasn't victory. This was acknowledgement. The music resumed. Dancing began. Later in the evening, as the sun fully disappeared and the lights shimmered against the dark sky, Daniel approached me alone. I didn't know about the vineyard structure, he said quietly. I know. You could have told me sooner. Yes. Why didn't you? I looked out over the dance floor. Because sometimes people reveal their expectations more clearly when they think something is guaranteed. He absorbed that slowly. Did you think I expected it? He asked. I thought you assumed it. He didn't argue. Vanessa joined us a moment later. Her tone was softer now. The champagne edition was canceled, she said. My parents covered the smaller dessert upgrade themselves. That was appropriate, I replied. She nodded. There was no sarcasm in her expression now. Only recalibration. As the night continued, I noticed something subtle. Vanessa's interactions with me had changed. More deliberate. More careful. Not overly sweet. Not dismissive. Measured. The attempted transfer. The unapproved upgrade. The public labeling. Each test had been met with structure. And structure had held. Near the end of the evening, as guests began departing, I walked alone for a moment along the edge of the vineyard. The air was cool. The vines stood silent under the lights. This land was still mine. Legally. Strategically. But more importantly, emotionally secure. Daniel and Vanessa had married tonight. The contracts were intact. The boundaries were visible. And something had shifted. Not explosive. Not dramatic. Balanced. They had tested the perimeter. The perimeter did not move. And when boundaries don't move, people adjust. Tomorrow, they would leave for their honeymoon. Life would continue. But tonight, under the string lights and quiet stars, one thing was clear. I was no longer the sponsor. I was the standard. And standards, once established, rarely need to be repeated. The morning after the wedding, the vineyard was quiet again. No music. No laughter. No champagne glasses clinking under string lights. Just dew resting gently on the rows of vines, and a soft haze rising from the ground as the sun came up. I drove out alone. Not because I needed to. Because I wanted to. The event crew had already cleared most of the rentals. Chairs gone. Tables folded. Only faint tire tracks in the grass remained as proof that 200 people had gathered there less than 12 hours earlier. It looked like itself again. That mattered. I walked slowly along the gravel path toward the wooden arch. The florals had been removed, leaving only the simple structure behind. Stripped of decoration. Solid. I ran my hand lightly along the wood. Ownership isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. A message from Daniel. Boarding now. Thank you for everything, Mom. Simple. No tension. No defensiveness. Just acknowledgement. I replied, travel safely. Marriage is built daily. He responded with a heart emoji. Small things matter. Back at home, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the sponsorship agreement in front of me. Everything had been honored. No additional charges. No unexplained transfers. No last-minute manipulations. The structure had held. Around noon, Harold called. Just confirming, he said. The vineyard restructuring is finalized. All documentation is recorded. Thank you, I replied. And Eleanor, he added, you handled this properly. I allowed myself a small smile. I handled it early. There's a difference. By Tuesday, Daniel and Vanessa were posting honeymoon photos from Italy. Lake Como. Blue water. Bright smiles. Comments flooded in beneath their pictures. Dream wedding. Perfect couple. Fairy tale. Perception is easy to curate. Reality requires maintenance. On Wednesday afternoon, Vanessa sent me a private message. Thank you again for everything. I know we had differences, but I hope we can move forward. I read it twice before answering. Moving forward requires understanding, not forgetting. 3 dots appeared, then stopped. A few minutes later, I understand more than you think. That was new. When they returned from their honeymoon 2 weeks later, they came over for dinner. No event planners. No contracts on the table. Just the 3 of us. Vanessa brought wine. Daniel brought flowers. We ate quietly at first. Then Daniel cleared his throat. I've been thinking about something, he said. Yes. I replied. I realized I've always seen the vineyard as part of my future. Like it was already mine. I didn't interrupt. And I think I took that for granted. The word landed properly this time. Vanessa looked at him, then at me. We both did, she said. Not defensive. Not strategic. Just stated. I appreciate that you protected yourself, she added. Even if I didn't like it. I held her gaze. Protection doesn't mean exclusion, I said. It means stability. Daniel nodded. I want us to build something on our own, he said. Without assuming. Good. That was the shift I needed to hear. After dinner, Vanessa helped me clear the plates without being asked. Small gesture, but deliberate. As they prepared to leave, she paused near the doorway. I meant what I said at the reception, she said quietly. About building something stronger. So did I replied. When the door closed behind them, I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. That's the word. Aligned. With my boundaries. With my values. With my late husband's foresight. Arthur used to tell Daniel when he was young, respect is what keeps families intact. Not money. It took a wedding, a contract, and a few tested limits for that lesson to land fully. But it landed. The vineyard remains under my name. The trust remains structured. The bank's safeguards remain active. Not because I expect betrayal. Because I understand human nature. Generosity without clarity invites confusion. Clarity without emotion invites resentment. But clarity with steadiness? That invites respect. I was never the sponsor. I was never the obstacle. I was the foundation. And foundations don't argue. They hold. The wedding is over. The contracts are signed. The marriage has begun. And in the quiet that follows celebration, one truth stands firm. When you define your worth calmly, people learn how to meet it. About a month after the wedding, something small happened. Small enough that most people wouldn't notice. But I did. Daniel called on a Tuesday evening. Not to ask for money. Not to discuss property. Just to ask if I wanted to join them for dinner at their condo. Vanessa had made lasagna. I'd love to, I said. When I arrived, the place looked different. Not bigger. Not more expensive. Just lived in. Wedding photos framed on the wall. A bowl of fruit on the kitchen counter. 2 sets of shoes by the door instead of 1. They were building something. Daniel poured wine. Vanessa set the table. No place cards. No titles. Just my name spoken naturally. Eleanor, can you grab the salad? Not sponsor. Not support. Just Eleanor. We ate, talked about their honeymoon, laughed about a missed train in Milan. At one point, Daniel mentioned they were reviewing their monthly budget. We realized we didn't actually know where everything was going, he said. So we're tracking it now. I nodded. That's wise. Vanessa added quietly. It feels better when we know what's ours. That word again. Ours. Earned. Not assumed. After dinner, Daniel pulled out a folder. For a split second, I almost smiled at the symmetry. But this folder wasn't for me. It was theirs. We started a savings plan, he said, for a down payment on a larger home someday. He hesitated. And we're not factoring the vineyard into that. There it was. Clarity. I think that's appropriate, I said. Vanessa met my eyes. We want whatever comes from you someday to feel like a gift, not a strategy. I held her gaze for a long moment. That's a healthy way to see it. Because it was. The dynamic had shifted. Not dramatically. Gradually. The tension from before the wedding had settled into something more stable. But stability is tested over time, not speeches. 2 weeks later, another test came. Daniel called one afternoon, sounding uneasy. Mom, I need your advice. About what? There's an investment opportunity. A friend from work pitched it to me. It's ambitious. How ambitious? He named a number. It was significant. Are you considering using inheritance projections? I asked calmly. A pause. I thought about it, he admitted. And then I realized that's not real money yet. Good. What does Vanessa think? I asked. She told me we should only invest what we can afford to lose. Better. And what do you think? I asked. I think I need to build my own track record. There it was again. Ownership. Responsibility. He wasn't asking for funds. He was asking for perspective. That difference matters. I advised caution, diversification, patience. Not once did the conversation drift toward what I could provide. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Not because they stopped testing, but because they had started thinking differently. A few days later, Vanessa invited me to join her at a local charity luncheon. Just the two of us. No Daniel. We sat side by side at a round table in a modest banquet hall downtown. Midway through the event, she leaned toward me. I've been thinking about what you said, she whispered. About what? About generosity needing direction. I listened. My parents always handled money informally, she said. It caused problems later. I didn't respond immediately. And I guess I assumed you'd just continue handling things the same way. Assumptions are easy, I said softly. She nodded. I don't want our marriage to start with blurred lines. That sentence mattered. Not because it praised me, because it showed awareness. Later that evening, as I drove home, I thought about the entire sequence. The place card, the hallway conversation, the attempted transfer, the champagne tower, the vineyard restructuring. Each moment had felt like pressure. But pressure, when managed properly, reveals character. Daniel was no longer speaking in terms of entitlement. Vanessa was no longer testing casually. They weren't perfect. They were aware. And awareness is the beginning of maturity. At home, I opened the drawer in Arthur's study one more time. The vineyard documents remained exactly where I had placed them. Unmoved. Secure. But for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel the need to touch them. Protection had done its job. Not by isolating me, but by stabilizing the structure around me. Families don't break because of money. They fracture because of unspoken expectations. Once expectations are named, they either collapse or they evolve. Ours had evolved. Not into dependence. Not into distance. Into respect. And respect, once earned, is far more valuable than any vineyard. 3 months after the wedding, I hosted Sunday dinner again. Not for an occasion. Not for a negotiation. Just because it was Sunday. The house smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken. The same recipe I've made for decades. The same wooden table polished by years of use. The same grandfather clock ticking steadily in the hallway. Daniel and Vanessa arrived at 4. No tension in their shoulders. No folders in their hands. Just a pie from a bakery and a bottle of wine. Hi, Mom, Daniel said, kissing my cheek. Hi, Eleanor, Vanessa added, meeting my eyes directly. No hesitation. No performance. We ate slowly. Talked about work. About a neighbor's new puppy. About how the vineyard harvest looked promising this year. At one point, Daniel said something that made me pause. I drove past the vineyard last week, he said. Didn't stop. Just wanted to see it. And I asked. It looked strong, he said. Like it always does. I nodded. It is. He hesitated slightly. I don't see it as mine anymore, he added. I see it as yours. There was no resentment in his voice. Only clarity. That's accurate, I said gently. Vanessa reached for her glass. And someday, she said carefully, If it becomes ours, it will be because you chose that. Not because they assumed. Not because they positioned. Because I chose. That was the difference. After dinner, Daniel helped wash dishes without being asked. Vanessa dried them. Small movements. Natural rhythm. At one point, Vanessa said quietly, "I used to think independence meant not needing anyone." I looked at her. What does it mean now? It means not expecting someone to carry what we haven't earned. I held her gaze for a long moment. That's a strong foundation, I said. When they left that evening, the house didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. There's a difference. I walked upstairs to Arthur's study one last time. The drawer remained closed. The vineyard documents untouched. The trust intact. But something inside me had shifted. In the beginning, when I saw that place card, family sponsor, I felt reduced. Defined by contribution. Measured by generosity. But that night had not been an insult. It had been a mirror. It showed me where I had allowed love to blur into access. Where support had quietly turned into expectation. And it gave me the opportunity to redraw the lines. Not loudly. Not angrily. Clearly. That clarity did not destroy my family. It strengthened it. Daniel no longer speaks as if the future is guaranteed. Vanessa no longer tests boundaries casually. And I no longer confuse giving with being valued. Arthur used to say something when Daniel was young and frustrated about chores. Privileges follow responsibility. It took a wedding, a contract, a declined transfer, and a champagne tower to bring that lesson full circle. But it arrived. And now, when I sit at my kitchen table in the quiet mornings, coffee warming my hands, I don't feel like a sponsor. I feel like what I have always been. A woman who built something carefully. A mother who loves deeply. And a person who understands that dignity is not given by others. It is defined by you. The vineyard still stands. The trust remains structured. The boundaries remain intact. But the tension that once hovered over family dinners has dissolved into something steadier. Respect. That is the real inheritance. Not land. Not money. Not even legacy. Respect. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt reduced to what you provide, if you've ever been labeled instead of valued, let this be your reminder. You are not an open account. You are not a silent guarantee. You are not a title printed on cardstock. You are the foundation. And foundations do not beg to be acknowledged. They simply hold. The wedding came and went. The contracts were signed. The tests were made. But in the end, nothing was lost. Only clarified. And sometimes, clarity is the most loving thing you can give.